before the Education Minister, the Schools Minister, Nick Gibb, joins us now. Nick Gibb, very good morning to you. Are you sending out the message to schools that mobile phones must be banned in the classroom?
Yes, in essence. We're calling the call for evidence today. An increasing number of schools up and down the country are, in fact, banning mobile phones from the school day. And we want to find out how they're doing that in the most effective ways. And then we will revise our guidance to schools based on that evidence. We're also engaging in building on the reforms to improving school behaviour generally. Over the last 10 years, we've given teachers more power, head teachers more power over maintaining order and discipline in our schools. We want to go further. We want to eliminate this low-level disruption that affects some schools. And because no child should be affected by the disruption of a child in the lesson. It affects the whole lesson if just one child misbehaves. So we want to take further measures, and that's what, again, this call for evidence is to identify best practice that's already being used in some schools effectively, and then to spread that right across the school system.
One of the issues is that you might have a London comprehensive school which has thousands of students, all of whom bring a mobile phone, because it's really important for parents that they're able to communicate with their children perhaps before or after school or in an emergency. How does a school ensure the security of all of those mobile phones? Does it have a system where it takes in each individual phone? Or do they have them in their bags, which is not going to stop the disruption? I mean, what is the government's advice for head teachers on how you police this?
Well, that's the purpose of the call for evidence. And what I do know is that there are many schools that do that. They take in the mobile phones as the children enter the school. There are others that rely on trust, that they don't emerge from the bags. And if they do, then they're confiscated. And what our behaviour advisor says, that if you have a consistent approach to and very clear rules that are clearly communicated in a school, you do find very high levels of compliance with the rules about mobile phones. And that's that kind of best practice we want to spread across the school system.
Minister, good morning. We're hearing head teachers there sort of objecting to being told what to do. I'd just like to clarify the status of what you're doing. You use the term guidance. So is this, in fact, not a rule? This will just be guidance. Are head teachers still free to make their own decisions in their school? And does that depend on the status of the school? Would it be different in an academy school or a free school compared to a local authority school? How's it actually going to work? Is this guidance or is this rules?
Yeah, this is all guidance. And in order to change guidance, we have to have a call for evidence. We have to consult the sector. And that's the process that we're going through now. But the intention is to strengthen the guidance to schools, to encourage schools to keep mobile phones out of the school day so that children can focus on their studies and not distracted by social media and by looking at items on their mobile phones when they really ought to be focusing on the lesson in hand.
One of the other issues, huge issue for parents, schools, pupils, children, is the isolation of children when they come into contact with a positive COVID case, either in the classroom or outside of school. And apparently there are almost 250,000 pupils off school in England as a result of COVID. We have a couple of weeks left of the summer term before children break up. What is the alternative to isolating children in bubbles? Is it to test them every day if they've been in contact with a positive case and only isolate them if they themselves are positive? Or do you have a policy of vaccinating children before they return in September?
Well, it is important that we are able to identify children who have the virus, and that's about 1 in 3 people who have COVID don't show any symptoms. That's why we have this twice-weekly testing of children at home. And of course, if you have come into contact with somebody who's COVID, whether in a school or in society generally, then you are asked to self-isolate in order to minimize the spread of that virus. It's a very important policy. But we have been testing through a trial in a small number of secondary schools, whether daily testing of somebody who has come into contact with somebody with COVID is an effective alternative to self-isolation. That trial finishes tomorrow, and we'll look at the data and on the advice of Public Health England, we'll take further decisions.
Are you suggesting that that might bring in a change before the end of this term? Because I know that some parents are at their wits' end with, even having one child off isolating once for 10 days, considering the extent of the damage to our children's education over the pandemic and the period of time they've gone without proper education in many cases, despite the best efforts of teachers, I have to acknowledge that. But to have them isolating again is so detrimental. Is there any chance you could bring that in before this term ends?
But there are about 3% of pupils who right now are self-isolating for the 10 days as a consequence of coming into contact with somebody with COVID. It's gone up from about 1% the week before. And this is in line with the rise in infections we're seeing in the community. So in areas of high infection rates, you might see a higher rate of self-isolation than that. But these are part of a raft of measures, including ventilation and hygiene and staggered lunch breaks in schools to try and make sure that we keep children safe.
Yeah, sorry, my question was, is there a chance? I mean, I've just had a child off self-isolating. I mean, you tear your hair out when it happens because he's already had his GCSEs cancelled. He's had, a tough year, like the whole generation of children has had. And then they face, just before their assessments, they face another 10 days of isolation. So is there, I worry that perhaps they go back into school, there's another COVID positive case, and off they are again. Is there any chance you might change that policy before the end of the term?
Well, the trial doesn't finish until tomorrow, and then, of course, the scientists have to pore over that data to determine whether it is an effective way of having an alternative to self-isolation. But we do want to make sure we tackle this.
Does that mean it's definitely not happening until September?
Well, look, it all depends on the advice that comes out as a consequence of this trial. This is just one trial. What we are saying in September, we've written to schools yesterday, is that they should prepare for on-site testing of children as they return from the summer break. We need to do everything we can to identify asymptomatic cases of COVID, so we're not spreading COVID within the school environment. That's terribly important. If you want to keep children in school, these safety measures are part and parcel of keeping children in school, and that's the priority of the government. We wanted schools to be opening in March, which they did. Education is a priority. They're the last to close during this pandemic. They're the first to open as we set off down the roadmap to normality because of the priority we attach to children being in school with their friends and being with their teacher.
And just a reminder from me to people that if you're told your child cannot go to school by the school, that counts just the same for NHS test and trace. For the £500 payment that's available to those on low incomes, but in some local authorities, it's not perfect, that you may qualify for if you can't work from home and you can't go to work or you can't have your self-employment income. A school telling your child to go home so you have to look out after them does count under those test and trace rules.
Yeah, really important information. Mr. Gibb, what did you make of the pretty shocking video of Professor Chris Whitty being, manhandled in a frankly disgusting way by two people and one other person filming it, of course? It's part of the curse of mobile phones and social media that this was filmed. Does Professor Chris Whitty need to have some kind of bodyguard or security? Because this isn't the first time that this has happened to him.
Those scenes are quite appalling. And I know it's now a matter for a police investigation. Nobody, however well known they are, should face that kind of harassment while just simply walking through the park or walking on the street. And we live in a free society, a law-abiding society, and we must make sure that the full weight of the law and the justice system applies to the perpetrators of that terrible crime. In terms of protection, that is, of course, a matter for the security services, but it really, to be frank, it should not be necessary for someone, however well known, to have security just by walking through a park or walking on the street. It really shouldn't be necessary. And we all owe Chris Whitty a great debt of gratitude for his work during the pandemic and the advice that he's provided to government and the advice that he's been giving to the public as we try and navigate our way through dealing with this dreadful pandemic.
Should those individuals be prosecuted? I mean, it seems astonishing that they shouldn't be.
Well, I hope this is subject to a police investigation. I hope the whole weight of the legal and the justice system will be applied to the perpetrators of this crime.
If I can take you back, Minister, to our original subject, mobile phones, just a message that came in here from Twitter, Blasteel. Mobiles are sometimes used during class to make up for the lack of IT equipment, but not allowed to be used in general. This is another case of a Tory projecting what he thinks happen in poor schools. Is there enough IT equipment? Will you guarantee, if you're going to ban mobile phones in schools, that every school across the country will have sufficient IT equipment so that pupils are able to use the internet for research when it's necessary?
Well, before COVID started, there were, I think, 2.9 million computers in schools. And during the COVID crisis, we purchased another 1.3 million computers so that children could continue to study at home. And of course, we are now looking at how we can use all that technology to in a sustainable way in the future. But of course, it has to be used in an effective way. And not just used for the sake of it. We want to make sure that children get the best education possible, and not every lesson will be driven by technology. What matters is that they are in class, that they are learning to reading fluently, that they're taught math in the most effective way, that they have a knowledge-rich curriculum, and that the behaviour in our classrooms is good, so that children can study unmolested and without having their lessons disrupted by that one child causing trouble in the classroom. And that's really what our consultation today is about. How do we build on the reforms of the last 10 years to improve behaviour, to eliminate low-level disruption, and to make sure that children don't face bullying, either through the mobile phone or any other form of bullying, that schools are safe, disciplined environments where children can be happy and can study and learn and be taught effectively.
Just finally, I met you when we talked about financial education in schools. Yes. We've got the financial education textbook just launched in Scotland, following England and Northern Ireland, and Wales is to come soon. But when I met you, you're quite in favour of old-fashioned schools and good behaviour and morality. I just wonder, with what we've seen over the weekend, with the Secretary of State for Health breaching his own COVID rules and losing his job, and other similar questions with this government, does the government set a good example for the nation's children on how to behave ethically?
Well, first of all, thank you for all your work in helping to improve financial education in schools, and the textbook. Hugely appreciated. It's a very effective piece of work. In terms of the weekend, Matt Hancock himself, who was a very effective health secretary, let's not forget, he kept the health service from being overwhelmed. He's been responsible for rolling out one of the world's most effective vaccination programs, with 85% of adults now having at least one dose, 60% having had 2 doses. But he knew that he had broken the social distancing rules. He therefore resigned, and we saw that in the exchange of correspondence with the Prime Minister. So the story broke on Friday, and by Saturday we had a new health secretary, and because Matt Hancock,
as you point out, he didn't resign immediately. He did it. The story then came out in public. Then he wasn't sacked by the Prime Minister. He had to go to the Prime Minister and say, I think I should resign. I mean, as Martin says, what kind of standard does that set?
Well, if you look back at the sort of history of ministerial resignations, you'll see that time span between the story breaking on Friday and the resignation on Saturday is a very short period compared with ministerial resignations that I'm aware of in the past. So I think it was a very swift period, and we now have a new health secretary. OK,
so only resign once you're caught. That's the standard that you say has been set. Nick Gibb, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Good to see you this morning.
You too. Thank you.